The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 5, casting long shadows across the polished floors. The Reynolds triplets, Zoe, Amara, and Jade, stood at the Skyline Airways first-class check-in counter, their matching navy blazers and crisp white blouses contrasting with their deep brown skin. Though identical in appearance at first glance, closer observation revealed subtle difference. Zoe, born 3 minutes before her sisters, carried a worn leather journal beneath her arm, her eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. Amara, the middle triplet by mere minutes, wore wireless headphones around her neck, her fingers tapping an invisible piano against her thigh. Jade, the youngest, held a tablet displaying complex mathematical equations, her posture perfectly straight as she analyzed the terminal's architecture. Reservation for Reynolds, Zoe stated, sliding 3 passports across the counter. Skyline Flight 447 to Los Angeles. First class. The check-in agent, a middle-aged man with a practiced smile, scanned the passports, his eyebrows rising slightly at the birth date. You're all 12 years, 4 months, and 17 days. Jade confirmed precisely. Our documentation is in order. The agent nodded, typing rapidly. Of course, I just don't often see unaccompanied minors in first class. We're not classified as unaccompanied minors, Ahmad explained, her voice gentle but firm. Skyline's policy designates passengers aged 12 and older as young adult travelers, requiring parental authorization but not escort services. She slid a document across the counter, a notarized permission form signed by their father, Marcus Reynolds. The agent examined it, recognition flickering in his eyes at the signature. Reynolds, he repeated, connecting the dots, as in, yes. Zoe confirmed simply, neither flaunting nor hiding their connection. Our father is meeting us in Los Angeles. We're attending the Hudson Summer Institute for their 2-week engineering program. The agent's demeanor shifted subtly to greater deference. Of course, Miss Reynolds, everything is in order. Let me print your boarding passes and luggage tags. As he processed their check-in, the triplets exchanged glances. A silent communication honed through years of shared experiences. They didn't need their father's name to access appropriate service, but they'd learned not to waste energy protesting when it smoothed interactions. The agent handed over their boarding passes with a more genuinely warm smile. You're confirmed in 1 Ampere, 1B, and 1C. Boarding begins in 40 minutes at Gate C-17. The Skyline First Class Lounge is located 1 level up, and you're welcome to wait there until boarding. Thank you. The triplets responded in near-perfect unison. As they moved away from the counter, Jade made a notation on her tablet. Time from initial greeting to service completion, 3 minutes, 27 seconds. Average first-class check-in is 2 minutes, 40 seconds. The difference falls within standard deviation parameters, Amara noted, her expression thoughtful. Not statistically significant. Noted, Zoe replied, jotting something in her journal. Let's proceed to security. The triplets navigated the terminal with practiced efficiency, their rolling carry-ons trailing behind them in perfect alignment. Though they attracted occasional curious glances, 3 identical young black girls moving with uncommon poise through a predominantly white business travel environment, they maintained the composed dignity their grandmother had instilled in them since toddlerhood. Josephine Reynolds had taught her grandchildren that navigating spaces not designed with them in mind required what she called strategic composure, the ability to maintain dignity while documenting discrepancies that others might use to justify diminishment or exclusion. First-class line, Jade indicated as they approached the security checkpoint. They positioned themselves behind a white businessman in an expensive suit who glanced back with momentary surprise before returning to his phone call. The security officer examining boarding passes raised his eyebrows slightly at the first-class designation, but verified their documents without comment. Proceed to the scanner when ready. He instructed professionally. The security process unfolded without incident. The triplets knew exactly how to present themselves, removing shoes and electronics with efficient movements, standing in the body scanner with precise positioning, waiting patiently for clearance. Once through security, they made their way to the Skyline First Class Lounge. At the entrance, a hostess glanced up from her computer. Good morning, Zoe greeted her. Reynolds, party of 3 for Skyline 447. The hostess scanned their boarding passes, her expression professionally neutral with a hint of surprise. She quickly masked, welcome to the Skyline First Class Lounge. Miss Reynolds, and Miss Reynolds, please make yourselves comfortable. Boarding will be announced approximately 30 minutes prior to departure. Inside the lounge, The triplets selected seats in a quiet corner, arranging themselves with the practiced coordination of dancers who had rehearsed their movements countless times. Initial observations, Zoe inquired, opening her journal. Minimal service disparities during check-in and security, Jade reported, consulting her tablet. Momentary processing delays within standard parameters for statistical variance. Slight elevation in surprise. Indicators from staff, Amada added, but professionally managed and without service impact. Zoe made notes in her journal, not just recording observations, but crafting them into narrative form, creating context and continuity from discrete interactions. Their grandmother had taught them that documentation required both precision and narrative framing. Facts alone rarely created accountability without the story that connected them. Grandma would approve, she concluded, capping her pen. Phase 1 complete without incident. Phase 2 begins with boarding. The triplets settled into comfortable silence, each engaged in their preferred activity while remaining aware of their surroundings. Zoe continued writing in her journal, documenting not just what had occurred, but her observations about the lounge's demographic composition and service patterns. Amara slipped on her headphones, losing herself in a classical piano piece, while her fingers practiced finger positions against her thigh. Jade analyzed mathematical theorems on her tablet, occasionally glancing up to observe spatial relationships and human movement patterns throughout the lounge. Their collective awareness noted how staff approached other first-class passengers, offering beverages, providing flight updates, ensuring comfort. After 17 minutes, when no staff member had approached their corner, Amara removed her headphones. Service disparity approaching statistical significance, she noted quietly. Jade calculated precisely, 87% of other passengers have received proactive service offers. We remain in the unattended 13%. Zoe made a note in her journal before standing. I'll establish service expectation through direct request. She approached the refreshment counter, where a lounge attendant was arranging pastries. Excuse me, could we get 3 sparkling waters with lime, please? Of course. The attendant responded immediately. I'll bring those right over. Would you like anything else? Perhaps some breakfast? No, thank you. Just the sparkling waters. When the attendant delivered their beverages 2 minutes later, she was excessively cheerful, as though compensating for the earlier oversight. Here you are. Are you sure I can't get you anything else? Pastries. Fruit. We have a wonderful yogurt parfait this morning. We're fine. Thank you. Zoe replied with a polite smile. After the attendant departed, Jade updated her statistics. Reaction suggests awareness of service disparity. Compensation behavior indicates recognition of initial failure. Noted, Zoe replied, documenting the interaction in her journal. The announcement for their flight came precisely on schedule. Skyline Airways Flight 447 to Los Angeles is now boarding through Gate C-17. First-class passengers may board at their convenience. The Reynolds triplets gathered their belongings with efficient movements, leaving their corner of the lounge exactly as they had found it. As they approached the exit, the hostess who had checked them in offered a warm smile. Have a pleasant flight. Miss Reynolds, and Miss Reynolds. Thank you. They responded in unison, their strategic composure intact as they prepared for the next phase of their journey. Victoria Hayes. Senior Flight Attendant Victoria Hayes stood at the boarding door of Skyline Flight 447, greeting first-class passengers with the practiced warmth she had perfected over 18 years with the airline. At 46, Victoria carried herself with the confident authority of someone who had built her identity around her profession. Her blonde hair was secured in a perfect French twist, her uniform pressed to military precision, her makeup subtle but flawless. Good morning, Mr. Wilson. 2 amperes as usual. We have that Macallan 18. You prefer? She welcomed a regular passenger, a Manhattan investment banker who flew the JFK LAX route twice monthly. Victoria, wonderful to see you again. He responded with genuine pleasure. Victoria prided herself on remembering preferences and creating the personalized service experience that distinguished first class from the cattle car reality of economy. The boarding process continued smoothly as Victoria greeted each first-class passenger by name, demonstrating her meticulous pre-flight preparation. She had reviewed the manifest carefully, noting returning customers and researching new ones to anticipate needs and preferences. Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Whitman, 3 amperes and 3B. I remember you prefer an extra blanket. Mrs. Whitman, I've already placed one at your seat. The elderly couple beamed at this attention to detail. Victoria felt a surge of professional satisfaction. This was what distinguished a senior flight attendant from newer crew members. This ability to create a bespoke experience that justified the premium price point. As she consulted her tablet for the next passengers, Victoria frowned slightly. The manifest showed 3 passengers with the surname Reynolds assigned to first-class seats 1 Ampere, 1B, and 1C, but included minimal information, no previous flight history, no noted preferences, no status tier. This was unusual for first-class bookings, which typically included detailed passenger profiles. Victoria glanced toward the jet bridge, where Jennifer Lopez, a junior flight attendant with less than a year at Skyline, was assisting with boarding passes. Jennifer, 28, and still learning the finer points of premium service, caught Victoria's questioning look. "The Reynolds party is coming now," she said quietly. 3 young passengers. Victoria's frown deepened. "Young. This is first class, not Disney World." Before Jennifer could respond, the Reynolds triplets appeared at the aircraft door, boarding passes and passports in hand. Victoria's expression registered momentary shock before settling into a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Good morning," she said, her tone noticeably cooler than with previous passengers. "Boarding pass, please." Zoe presented the documents with a polite smile. "Good morning, Reynolds. Party of 3. 1A, 1B, and 1C." Victoria examined the boarding passes with unusual scrutiny. "These are first-class seats." "Yes," Jade confirmed. As indicated by the designation on our boarding passes, Victoria's smile became even more forced. "I see. And you're traveling?" "Alone. We're traveling as young adult passengers," Amara explained with the patient tone of someone who had clarified this point several times already. "Our documentation is in order." "Of course," Victoria replied, though her tone suggested otherwise. "Jennifer will show you to your seats." As Jennifer moved to assist the triplets, Victoria touched her arm and whispered, "Economy blankets and plastic cups for them. And keep an eye out. Children in first class always cause problems." Jennifer looked uncertain but nodded, as Victoria turned to greet the next passengers with renewed warmth. Her professional demeanor instantly restored. The triplets exchanged quick glances as they followed Jennifer to their seats. They hadn't heard Victoria's whispered instructions, but they recognized the shift in tone and treatment, a familiar pattern they had encountered before in premium spaces. "First row on the left." Jennifer directed them with a friendly smile that seemed to compensate for Victoria's chilliness. "Can I help with your carry-ons?" "We can manage. Thank you," Zoe replied as they efficiently stowed their bags in the overhead compartment. The first-class cabin of Skyline's Airbus, a 350 featured spacious pod-style seats, arranged in a 1-2-1 configuration, providing both privacy and direct aisle access for all passengers. The triplets had been assigned the center section of the first row, with Amara in the middle and her sisters on either side. As they settled into their seats, Zoe discreetly removed her journal. Recording the interaction at the boarding door, with precise detail, Jade activated her tablet's timestamp function, creating a record of their boarding time and initial service contact. Amara observed the other flight attendants' body language and nonverbal cues, noting the distinct shift between Victoria's warmth toward other passengers and her coolness toward them. Jennifer returned moments later with 3 plastic cups of water, which she placed on their armrests. With an apologetic smile, "Here you are. We'll begin our full beverage service after takeoff." "Thank you." The triplets responded politely. After Jennifer moved away, Jade made a notation on her tablet. "Crystal glassware for adults. Plastic cups for us." "The service differentiation begins," Zoe observed quietly, documenting this first disparity. Not Jennifer's decision. Amara noted she seemed uncomfortable with it. From their vantage point in the first row, the triplets could observe Victoria continuing to greet adult passengers with warm enthusiasm, offering to hang jackets and providing crystal glasses of water or champagne. The contrast with their own reception was impossible to miss. When Mr. Wilson boarded and took his seat in 2 Amperes directly behind Zoe, Victoria personally hung his jacket and brought him a tumbler of scotch, just a small one before takeoff. "Mr. Wilson, I know you prefer to wait until we're airborne for a proper drink. You're the best." "Victoria," he responded appreciatively. The boarding process continued, with first class gradually filling. Each new passenger received Victoria's warm welcome and personalized service. Crystal glassware, jacket hanging, personalized greetings, creating an increasingly obvious contrast with the plastic cups and minimal interaction the triplets had experienced. Once all first-class passengers were seated, Victoria disappeared into the galley while Jennifer distributed hot towels throughout the cabin. When she reached the triplets, she leaned closer and spoke quietly. "I'm sorry about the cups. I'll try to fix that during the main service. Amara smiled gently. Thank you. But please don't risk conflict on our behalf. We're documenting everything. Jennifer looked surprised but nodded subtly before moving on. The triplets continued their strategic composure, neither making a scene nor accepting differential treatment without record. They hadn't come looking for confrontation, but they were prepared to document whatever occurred with the methodical precision their grandmother had taught them. As the boarding door closed and the safety demonstration began, Victoria reappeared, moving through the cabin. To verify seatbelts and proper seat positions, she checked each passenger with professional thoroughness, offering small adjustments and reminders. When she reached the triplets row, her demeanor changed subtly. Her verification was technically complete, but distinctly cooler. Without the friendly commentary she had offered other passengers, she checked their seatbelts with a cursory glance and moved on without the comfortable or all set she had offered adults. Zoe documented the interaction in her journal, noting both what was said and what wasn't, creating a record of disparities that individually might seem insignificant but collectively formed a pattern of differential treatment. As Flight SL 447 pushed back from the gate and taxied toward the runway, the Reynolds triplets continued their strategic composure, maintaining dignity while documenting discrepancies. Just as Grandma Josephine had taught them, they had encountered this pattern before in first-class cabins, luxury hotels, and high-end restaurants. The specifics varied, but the underlying message remained consistent. You don't belong here. What Victoria Hayes couldn't know, what the triplets themselves didn't yet realize, was that this particular flight would become the catalyst for transformation, extending far beyond one discriminatory flight attendant or 3 composed young passengers. The next 5 hours would set in motion changes affecting an entire airline, an industry's approach to service equity, and thousands of passengers who would never know the origins of the accountability systems that would eventually protect them. For now, though, there was just the meticulous documentation of differential treatment by 3 12-year-old girls who had been prepared by their grandmother to maintain dignity while creating records that could not be dismissed or denied. Strategic composure in action as Flight SL 447 accelerated down the runway and lifted into the morning sky. First signs of trouble. As Skyline Flight 447 reached its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet, Victoria Hayes moved with practiced efficiency through the first-class cabin. The seatbelt sign had just been turned off, signaling the beginning of the premium service experience she had perfected over 18 years. Good morning from the flight deck. Captain Robert Garcia's voice came over the intercom. We've reached our cruising altitude with favorable conditions across our route. Flight time to Los Angeles will be approximately 5 hours and 20 minutes. Our cabin crew will begin service shortly. Sit back, relax, and enjoy your flight. Victoria began her pre-service preparation, moving through the cabin to confirm passenger preferences before the formal beverage service. This personal touch distinguished Skyline's first class from competitors, the sense that preferences were anticipated rather than merely accommodated. Mr. Wilson, will you be having your usual Macallan 18? She inquired with a warm smile. Yes, please. Victoria, you remember everything, he responded appreciatively. Mr. and Mrs. Whitman, still coffee for you and Earl Grey for Mrs. Whitman. Victoria continued to the next row. Exactly right. Mr. Whitman confirmed, impressed by her recall. When Victoria reached the first row, her demeanor shifted noticeably. Rather than the warm inquiries offered to adult passengers, she delivered a clipped question without making eye contact. What would you like to drink? She asked, addressing the 3 as a group rather than as individuals. Zoe responded with polite precision. Sparkling water with lime. Please. Same for me. Amada added, I'll have orange juice. Please. Jade requested. Victoria nodded curtly and moved on without the friendly acknowledgement she had offered other passengers. The difference was subtle but unmistakable. Technical compliance with service requirements without the warmth or personalization that defined the first-class experience. The triplets exchanged glances, their documentation continuing without disruption to their composed exteriors. Zoe made a note in her journal, capturing both Victoria's words and her shift in demeanor. Jade updated her service disparity log, adding timestamp and specific behavioral indicators. Amara observed the flight attendant's body language as she returned to warm, engaged interactions with the next passengers. Differential engagement pattern established, Jade noted quietly, consistent with previous experiences on premium carriers. Documented, Zoe confirmed, completing her narrative record of the interaction. When Victoria returned with the beverage cart, Jennifer assisting from the other end of the aisle, The pattern continued with increasing clarity. Adult passengers received their drinks in crystal glassware, served with cocktail napkins, small dishes of warm nuts, and personalized comments. Your McAllen, Arton. Mr. Wilson, I've included an extra ice sphere, just as you prefer. Earl Grey with lemon. Mrs. Whitman, I've steeped it for exactly 4 minutes. When Victoria reached the triplets row, she placed 3 plastic cups on their tray tables, without comment. Zoe and Amara's sparkling water lacking the lime they had requested. Jade's orange juice filled to the brim without room for ice. Before Victoria could move on, Zoe spoke up with polite directness. Excuse me, we requested sparkling water with lime, please. Victoria's expression tightened momentarily before she responded with artificial pleasantness. We generally reserve crystal glassware for adult passengers. Plastic is our standard for younger travelers. This was demonstrably untrue. Skyline had no such policy. As all 3 triplets knew from previous flights with the airline, but rather than directly challenging the falsehood, Zoe maintained strategic composure. I understand. Could we still have lime with our sparkling water? Please. Victoria's smile remained fixed. Of course, Jennifer will bring that right over. As Victoria moved to the next row, immediately resuming her warm, personalized service for adult passengers, Jennifer approached with lime wedges and apologetic eyes. Here you are, she said quietly, placing a small dish with several lime wedges on Zoe's tray table. Can I get you anything else? No, thank you, Zoe replied with a genuine smile. We appreciate your help. After Jennifer moved away, the triplets continued their documentation with methodical precision. This wasn't their first experience with differential treatment in premium settings, nor would it be their last. Their father had prepared them for such encounters, building on the strategic composure methodology their grandmother had developed during the civil rights era. Don't argue about the cups, Jade observed practically. Document the policy fabrication instead. Exactly, Zoe agreed, noting Victoria's false claim about glassware policy in her journal. Grandma always said documentation creates accountability better than confrontation. As the beverage service continued, Victoria's differential treatment became increasingly apparent to anyone paying attention. When she distributed warm towels, adult passengers received them with personalized comments. To refresh you after boarding, Mr. Wilson, or this will help you relax, Mrs. Donovan, while the triplets received theirs with silent efficiency. When she collected trash, she engaged adult passengers in friendly conversation. How is your daughter enjoying Stanford? Dr. Miller, while wordlessly removing the triplets' empty cups. These subtle disparities might have gone unnoticed by casual observers, but they were being meticulously documented by 3 young passengers who had been taught to recognize and record such patterns without disrupting their own composure. 30 minutes into the flight, the first direct incident occurred. As Victoria moved through the cabin preparing for meal service, she accidentally bumped Jade's seat without acknowledgement or apology, something she had carefully avoided with all other passengers. First physical contact, Jade noted on her tablet, adding precise timestamp and location data. Left shoulder impact approximately 3.7 newtons of force based on seat displacement. 5 minutes later, it happened again. Victoria bumped Amara's seat while distributing linen tablecloths to other first-class passengers. Once again, no acknowledgement or apology followed. Second, physical contact. Jade updated her log. Pattern emerging with 94% confidence interval. When Jennifer approached to set their tray tables for meal service, she hesitated visibly before placing paper placemats on their tables. Contrasting with the linen tablecloths Victoria had provided to all other first-class passengers. I'm sorry, Jennifer whispered. And here, discomfort evident. I was instructed to. We understand, Amara assured her gently. This isn't your decision. We're documenting everything. Jennifer's eyes widened slightly in surprise and something like relief before she moved to the next row. The triplets' response, neither causing a scene nor accepting differential treatment without record, clearly wasn't what she had expected. Throughout the cabin, other passengers had begun to notice the service disparities. Thomas Wilson, in 2 amperes, furrowed his brow as he observed the plastic cups and paper placemats provided to the young passengers in front of him, contrasting with his crystal glassware and linen tablecloth. The Whitmans exchanged confused glances after noticing that Victoria had accidentally bumped Zoe's seat while carefully avoiding contact with all other passengers. Patricia Donovan, a Skyline board member traveling in 3C, had been observing with increasing concern. As the airline's first black female board member and head of its customer experience committee, she recognized the pattern. Developing with professional alarm, she discreetly activated her tablet's recording function, creating an independent record of the service disparities unfolding before her. As meal service began, Victoria's differential treatment continued with increasing obviousness. Adult passengers were addressed by name, offered detailed explanations of menu options, and provided recommendations based on their preferences. Mr. Wilson, the seared sea base is excellent today, prepared exactly to your preference from your last flight with us. Mrs. Whitman, you mentioned you prefer lighter options? I'd recommend the quinoa salad with grilled chicken. When Victoria reached the triplets row, she delivered a curt question without making eye contact. Chicken or pasta? The oversimplification of the menu options, which actually included 4 sophisticated choices with detailed descriptions, and represented another layer of differential treatment. Rather than challenging this directly, the triplets maintained their strategic composure. Could you please describe the chicken preparation? Zoe inquired politely. Victoria's expression tightened. It's just chicken. Regular airline chicken. This dismissive characterization contrasted sharply with the herb-crusted free-range chicken breast with roasted garlic reduction she had described to other passengers. Again, rather than directly confronting the discrepancy, Zoe maintained dignified persistence. I see. In the pasta option, Victoria's irritation became more visible. It's pasta with sauce. Are you going to want a detailed description of every ingredient? The shift from subtle differential treatment to overt rudeness marked a significant escalation. From her seat in 3C, Patricia Donovan's concern deepened as she continued documenting the interaction. No, thank you for clarifying. Zoe replied with composed dignity. I'll have the chicken, please. Same for me. Amada added, I'll try the pasta. Jade decided. Victoria nodded curtly and moved on, immediately resuming her warm, detailed interactions with adult passengers in the next row. The contrast had become so obvious that several passengers were now openly noticing with confused or concerned expressions. When the meals were delivered 20 minutes later, the pattern continued. Adult passengers received their selections with personalized comments and offers of fresh pepper or Parmesan. The triplets received their plates with silent efficiency and no such offers. Most tellingly, while all other passengers had received the advertised herb-crusted free-range chicken breast, Zoe and Amara were served what appeared to be the economy-class chicken option, a simple grilled breast, without the described preparation or presentation. Rather than protesting, Zoe photographed the meal discreetly, creating visual documentation of the service disparity. Jade did the same with her pasta, which similarly lacked the presentation and garnishes provided to adult passengers who had selected the same option. Thomas Wilson, in 2 amperes, could no longer contain his concern. As Victoria passed his seat, he gestured for her attention. Excuse me, he said quietly. I couldn't help noticing the young ladies in row 1 seemed to be receiving different meals than what you described to me as the first-class options. Victoria's expression froze momentarily before she responded with professional deflection. We make appropriate service adjustments for younger travelers, Mr. Wilson. Some appreciate simpler preparations, but they weren't offered that choice. Wilson persisted. They specifically asked about the standard options. Victoria's smile remained fixed, but her eyes hardened. I assure you, Sia, everything is being handled according to our service protocols. Please enjoy your meal. She moved away quickly, preventing further discussion. Wilson frowned, glancing toward the triplets, who continued their meal with composed dignity while documenting each discrepancy in their respective formats. The first hour of flight SL 447 had established a clear pattern of differential treatment, from plastic cups instead of crystal glassware to paper placemats instead of linen tablecloths to simplified meal options without proper description or presentation. Each disparity had been meticulously documented by 3 young passengers who had been prepared for exactly this scenario, creating a comprehensive record that would later prove impossible to dismiss as misunderstanding or miscommunication. What no one yet realized was that this was merely the beginning. Victoria Hayes had committed to a course of differential treatment that would escalate throughout the flight, creating increasingly obvious disparities that would eventually force intervention from multiple directions. For now, though, there was just the meticulous documentation of service differences by 3 12-year-old girls applying their grandmother's methodology with precise effectiveness, maintaining dignity while creating records that would ultimately ensure accountability. As Skyline Flight 447 continued eastward across the American heartland, Victoria Hayes maintained her pattern of differential treatment with increasing obviousness. What had begun with plastic cups and paper placemats had expanded to include every aspect of the first-class service experience. 2 hours into the flight, Victoria moved through the cabin, distributing the premium amenities that distinguish Skyline's first-class experience: cashmere blankets, luxury skincare kits, and noise-canceling headphones. As with previous service elements, the contrast between her interactions with adult passengers and the Reynolds triplets was unmistakable. "Mr. Wilson, your cashmere blanket. I remember you prefer it unfolded," she said warmly, presenting the plush gray blanket with a flourish. "Mrs. Whitman, your lavender-infused eye mask as requested." She continued to the next row, offering personalized service with practiced charm. When Victoria reached the first row, she wordlessly placed 3 thin blue blankets on the triplets' armrests, the standard economy-class blankets, rather than the cashmere ones provided to every other first-class passenger. No amenity kits or premium headphones accompanied the blankets. The triplets exchanged glances, but maintained their strategic composure. This latest disparity was being documented like all the others. Zoe capturing the narrative elements in her journal, Jade recording precise timestamps and service differences on her tablet, Amara noting the flight attendant's body language and nonverbal cues. From his seat in 2 amperes, Thomas Wilson observed this latest differential treatment with increasing discomfort. As an investment banker who regularly traveled in premium cabins, he had never witnessed such obvious service disparities. Victoria's behavior violated not just professional standards but basic courtesy. "Excuse me," he called as Victoria passed his seat. "I believe you've provided the young ladies with economy blankets rather than the cashmere ones." Victoria's practiced smile remained in place, though her eyes hardened. "We find that younger travelers sometimes spill or damage premium items. Mr. Wilson, we're simply taking appropriate precautions." This justification was both condescending and inconsistent with her previous explanation about standard practice for younger travelers. The shifting rationale suggested improvisation rather than policy, a pattern the triplets had encountered before when service providers attempted to justify discriminatory treatment. Wilson frowned, unconvinced. "They've been perfectly well behaved throughout the flight. I see no reason for differential service." "I appreciate your concern, sire." Victoria replied with professional deflection. "Rest assured, everything is being handled according to our service standards." She moved quickly to the next row, preventing further discussion. Wilson glanced toward the triplets, who continued their documentation without disruption to their composed exteriors. Their lack of protest or emotional response clearly wasn't what he had expected from 12-year-olds facing such obvious differential treatment. In row 3, Patricia Donovan continued her own documentation with growing concern. As a Skyline board member and head of the Customer Experience Committee, she recognized that Victoria's behavior violated multiple service policies and potentially constituted discriminatory treatment, a serious matter with potential legal implications beyond the immediate customer service failure. Systematic service disparities, now evident across multiple categories. Donovan noted in her tablet, pattern suggests intentional differential treatment rather than isolated oversights. The escalation continued when Jennifer approached the triplets row, her discomfort increasingly evident as she delivered 3 pairs of economy-class headphones. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I tried to bring the premium ones, but we understand," Amara assured her gently. "This isn't your responsibility." Jennifer's expression reflected both relief and concern. "Is there anything I can get you?" "Anything at all. We're fine, thank you," Zoe replied with a small smile. "We appreciate your kindness." After Jennifer moved away, Jade updated her service log. 11 documented disparities across 7 service categories. Pattern established beyond statistical doubt. "The statistical evidence is compelling," Amara agreed quietly. "But the human element matters too." Jennifer's discomfort and Mr. Wilson's intervention suggest others are recognizing the disparities as inappropriate. Zoe nodded, making additional notes. Grandma Josephine always said third-party witnesses are crucial for establishing credibility. Their perceptions help validate our documentation. Victoria's behavior escalated further when she accidentally bumped Zoe's seat for the 3rd time while distributing mid-flight snacks, a pattern too consistent to be coincidental, especially given her careful movements around all other passengers. 3rd physical contact. Jade noted on her tablet, intentional pattern confirmed at 99.7% confidence interval. The triplets maintained their strategic composure, neither protesting nor accepting these disparities without record. Their methodology, developed by their grandmother during the civil rights movement and refined by their father for contemporary contexts, was working exactly as designed. Each differential treatment was being meticulously documented, creating a comprehensive record that would later prove impossible to dismiss as misunderstanding or miscommunication. 3 hours into the flight, the pattern expanded to include service omissions, When Victoria offered mid-flight refreshments to first-class passengers, she completely skipped the triplets row, moving directly from Mr. Famson. Wilson in 2 amperes to the Whitmans in 3 amperes and 3B. This omission was too obvious to be accidental and too significant to ignore. From across the aisle, Eleanor Whitman noticed the skip and frowned in confusion. Victoria, I believe you missed the young ladies in row 1, she observed with the straightforwardness of someone in her 70s who had stopped concerning herself with others' comfort over perceived rudeness. Victoria's expression flickered briefly before her professional mask returned. I'll circle back to them after completing the main service. Mrs. Whitman, some younger travelers prefer different snack options. This explanation, contradicting her previous appropriate service adjustments and damage precautions justifications, further confirmed the improvisational nature of her responses. There was no consistent policy being applied, just a pattern of differential treatment, seeking varying justifications. They should at least be asked their preferences. Eleanor persisted with grandmotherly indignation. Basic courtesy applies regardless of age. Victoria's smile tightened. Of course. I'll return to them momentarily. She didn't. After completing the snack service for all other first-class passengers, Victoria disappeared into the galley without returning to the triplets row. This deliberate omission was the most obvious disparity yet, a complete service failure rather than merely differential treatment. Thomas Wilson had reached his limit. He unfastened his seatbelt and approached the galley, where Victoria was arranging items on a service cart. Excuse me, he began with the direct tone of someone accustomed to organizational authority. The young ladies in row 1 were completely skipped during the refreshment service. This is unacceptable. Victoria's expression hardened momentarily before her customer service training reasserted itself. I apologize for the oversight. Mr. Wilson, I'll address it immediately. This isn't an isolated oversight, Wilson continued firmly. I've observed systematic differential treatment throughout this flight. Plastic cups instead of glassware. Economy blankets instead of cashmere. Complete omission of amenity kits. As a frequent first-class passenger on Skyline, I find this level of service disparity disturbing. Victoria's professional facade cracked slightly, revealing the rigidity beneath. Mr. Wilson, I appreciate your concern, but I've been managing first-class service for 18 years. I assure you, everything is being handled appropriately. Appropriately for whom? Wilson challenged. Those young ladies have been perfectly well-behaved throughout the flight. I see no justification for treating them differently than any other first-class passenger. Before Victoria could respond, Patricia Donovan appeared in the galley entrance. Her Skyline board member identification visible on the lanyard around her neck. Is there a service issue I should be aware of? She inquired with the measured tone of executive authority. Victoria's expression shifted to one of professional concern as she recognized the board member identification. Not at all, Ms. Donovan. Mr. Wilson was just expressing some questions about our service protocols for younger travelers. I was expressing concern about discriminatory treatment, Wilson corrected firmly. The 3 young black girls in row 1 have received systematically different service throughout this flight, and I find it unacceptable. Patricia Donovan's expression remained professionally neutral, though her eyes sharpened at Wilson's explicit naming of the racial dimension. I've observed the same pattern. Mr. Wilson, thank you for bringing it to direct attention rather than remaining silent. She turned to Victoria, whose composure had visibly faltered at this escalation. As head of Skyline's Customer Experience Committee, I'm formally documenting these service disparities for review. Please provide standard first-class service to all passengers in the premium cabin, regardless of age. For the remainder of this flight, Victoria's expression froze in what appeared to be genuine shock. The confrontation had clearly escalated beyond what she had anticipated, involving not just a concerned fellow passenger but a board member with direct oversight of service standards. Of course. Ms. Donovan, she managed, air voice tight. There must have been some misunderstanding about appropriate service protocols. The only misunderstanding, Donovan replied evenly, appears to be about Skyline's commitment to consistent premium service for all first-class passengers. I expect immediate correction and will be documenting the response. As Victoria reluctantly prepared a refreshment tray with the same options offered to other passengers, Jennifer approached the galley with evident concern. Is everything all right? She asked quietly. I noticed some tension. Ms. Hayes appears to have misinterpreted our service standards for younger passengers. Donovan explained diplomatically. We're clarifying expectations for consistent premium service regardless of passenger age. Jennifer's expression reflected both vindication and anxiety. She had recognized the inappropriate treatment, but lacked the authority to directly challenge her senior colleague. I can take the refreshments to them, she offered, clearly wanting to provide proper service to the triplets she had been attempting to support throughout the flight. That would be appropriate. Donovanagheid. Recognizing Jennifer's good intentions, as Jennifer prepared to deliver the belated refreshments, Victoria's expression hardened into barely concealed resentment. The intervention by both a respected passenger and a board member had forced formal acknowledgement of the service disparities she had been implementing throughout the flight. However, this acknowledgement didn't represent resolution. Victoria's body language and expression suggested compliance without acceptance, in technical adherence to instructions, while maintaining her underlying resistance. Back in the cabin, the Reynolds triplets continued their strategic composure, documenting each development without disruption to their dignified exteriors. From their perspective, the escalating intervention represented exactly what their documentation methodology was designed to create: third-party recognition and formal acknowledgement of differential treatment that might otherwise be dismissed as misunderstanding or oversensitivity. When Jennifer arrived with a refreshment tray containing the same premium options offered to other passengers, she presented them with genuine warmth. "I apologize for the delay. Would you like to select from our refreshment options?" "Thank you." The triplets responded with synchronized politeness, each selecting an appropriate snack. As Jennifer served them, she spoke quietly. "I'm sorry about everything that's happened. This isn't how Skyline treats our passengers. We understand this reflects one individual's behavior, not the airline's values." Amara assured her gently. Jennifer appeared genuinely relieved by this perspective. "Is there anything else I can do to make the remainder of your flight more comfortable?" "We're fine. Thank you," Zoe replied with a small smile. "We appreciate your professionalism throughout this situation." After Jennifer departed, the triplets continued their documentation, adding this latest development to their comprehensive record. The pattern had been established, witnessed by multiple parties, and formally acknowledged by airline leadership. Whatever happened next would unfold against this backdrop of documented disparities too consistent to be coincidental and too pervasive to be dismissed. What Victoria Hayes couldn't know, what the triplets themselves didn't yet realize, was that this escalation had transformed a routine discriminatory encounter into something with potential consequences extending far beyond one flight attendant's behavior or three young passengers' experience. The presence of Patricia Donovan, the formal documentation by multiple parties, and the explicit intervention by other passengers had created accountability mechanisms that would ultimately lead to systemic changes throughout an entire airline and potentially an industry. For now, though, Flight SL 447 continued across the American heartland, with 3 hours still remaining before its Los Angeles arrival. Ample time for Victoria Hayes to decide whether to accept the correction and provide appropriate service or to continue her pattern of differential treatment despite the formal intervention. Given her evident resentment and rigidity, the triplets suspected the latter and continued their strategic composure accordingly, maintaining dignity while documenting disparities just as their grandmother had taught them. The confrontation, 4 hours into Skyline Flight 447, a tense calm had settled over the first-class cabin. Following the intervention by Thomas Wilson and Patricia Donovan, Victoria Hayes had technically complied with the directive to provide standard service to all passengers. Though her body language and minimal interaction with the Reynolds triplets made her resentment obvious, the triplets maintained their strategic composure, neither reacting to Victoria's coldness nor accepting differential treatment without record. Their documentation continued with methodical precision, Zoe capturing the narrative elements in her journal, Jade recording timestamps and specific behaviors on her tablet, Amara noting emotional subtext and interpersonal dynamics. Technically compliant service with continued interpersonal disparities, Jade noted on her tablet. Verbal communication reduced by 78% compared to interactions with other passengers. The psychological pattern remains consistent even as the service disparities have been partially addressed. Amara observed quietly. Victoria's compliance was indeed technical rather than genuine. When required to offer premium amenities to the triplets, she did so without the warm commentary provided to other passengers. When collecting items, she avoided eye contact or conversational engagement. When moving through the cabin, her body language remained tense and defensive. When passing their row, this subtle continuation of differential treatment had not gone unnoticed. Patricia Donovan continued her documentation from seat 3C, recording both the improvement in tangible service elements and the persistence of interpersonal disparities. Thomas Wilson observed with continued concern, his awareness of discrimination in premium travel settings permanently altered by what he had witnessed during this flight. The tenuous equilibrium shattered when Victoria emerged from the galley with the hot towel service that typically preceded landing preparation. Moving through the cabin with practiced efficiency, she offered warmed, scented towels to each adult passenger, with personalized comments, "To refresh you before arrival, Mr. Wilson. This lavender-infused towel should help with any travel fatigue, Mrs. Whitman." When Victoria reached the triplets row, her expression hardened as she wordlessly dropped 3 room-temperature towels on their tray tables, noticeably different from the steaming towels provided to other passengers. This blatant service disparity, following direct intervention from a board member, represented deliberate defiance rather than oversight. Before the triplets could respond, Thomas Wilson spoke from the row behind. "Those towels aren't heated." Victoria's expression froze momentarily before she recovered with artificial pleasantness. "The standard temperature is sometimes uncomfortable for younger travelers. Mr. Wilson, we're simply taking appropriate precautions." This latest justification, contradicting her previous explanations about standard practice and damage prevention, further confirmed the improvisational nature of her responses. There was no consistent policy being applied, just persistent differential treatment, seeking varying rationalizations. "That's absurd," Wilson replied, his patience visibly exhausted. "Stop making excuses for treating these young ladies differently than every other passenger in first class." Victoria's professional mask slipped, revealing the rigidity beneath. "Mr. Wilson, with all due respect, I've been managing first-class service for 18 years. I understand appropriate protocols better than—" "Appropriate protocols include consistent service standards, regardless of passenger characteristics," Patricia Donovan interjected. Having approached from her seat across the aisle, as previously discussed, Skyline expects equal treatment for all first-class passengers. Victoria's expression tightened further. "Ms. Donovan, I assure you I'm providing appropriate service based on passenger needs and capabilities. The only capability these young passengers seem to lack," Eleanor Whitman observed from row 3, "is the ability to be treated with basic courtesy by a senior flight attendant." Victoria flushed as the confrontation escalated to include multiple passengers. Her repeated justifications for differential treatment had become increasingly transparent, exposing what many observers now recognized as discriminatory behavior rather than professional judgment. Throughout this escalating tension, the Reynolds triplets maintained their strategic composure. They neither intervened in the confrontation nor reacted emotionally to Victoria's persistent disparities. Their documentation continued uninterrupted, creating a comprehensive record that would later prove invaluable. The situation reached critical mass when Jennifer approached from the galley, carrying 3 properly heated towels. "I brought these for our passengers in row 1, she said with quiet determination. "There was a mistake with the temperature." Victoria turned sharply. "There was no mistake. I made a service judgment based on my experience and authority as senior flight attendant. Skyline's service standards specify consistent premium amenities for all first-class passengers." Jennifer replied with unexpected firmness. "There's no policy exception for younger travelers." This direct challenge from her junior colleague visibly shocked Victoria. Jennifer had moved beyond private discomfort to public correction, placing professional standards above hierarchical deference. Victoria's response was immediate and harsh. "You're overstepping. Jennifer, return to the galley immediately." "I'm following Skyline's service protocols," Jennifer countered, still holding the properly heated towels. "All passengers deserve consistent premium service. I am the senior flight attendant on this aircraft." Victoria hissed, her professional demeanor completely abandoned. "You will follow my instructions without question." The confrontation had escalated beyond service disparities to a public power struggle between crew members, an unprecedented breakdown in cabin professionalism that shocked the first-class passengers witnessing it. Patricia Donovan intervened with executive authority. "This is unacceptable. I'm requesting captain involvement immediately." "That won't be necessary," Victoria insisted, her expression suggesting dawning awareness of how far the situation had deteriorated. "We can resolve this without—" "This has moved beyond a service issue to a crew management concern," Donovan continued firmly. "As a board member with oversight of customer experience, I'm formally requesting captain intervention under Skyline's leadership escalation protocol." Victoria's face paled as she recognized the seriousness of this escalation. Captain involvement in cabin crew disputes was extremely rare, typically reserved for safety concerns or serious professional breaches. That a board member was formally invoking this protocol suggested consequences beyond what she had anticipated. "I'll inform the captain," Jennifer offered quietly, clearly relieved that proper procedures were being followed, despite the uncomfortable confrontation. As Jennifer moved toward the cockpit to request captain intervention, Victoria stood frozen in the aisle, her 18 years of professional identity visibly crumbling as the situation spiraled beyond her control. Throughout this escalating confrontation, The Reynolds triplets maintained their strategic composure, neither intervening in the conflict nor reacting emotionally to the tension surrounding them. Their documentation continued with methodical precision, creating a comprehensive record of not just the service disparities, but the resulting confrontation and intervention. Conflict escalation timestamp 18:27 Eastern. Jade noted on her tablet, multiple witness involvement confirms pattern recognition by third parties. Jennifer demonstrated ethical courage despite hierarchical pressure. Amara observed quietly. That's statistically uncommon in organizational settings. Captain Intervention Protocol formally invoked. Zoe documented in her journal, systematic response now required rather than individual resolution. Their composed documentation amid chaotic confrontation reflected precisely what their grandmother had taught them. That strategic composure created accountability through comprehensive records rather than emotional reactions. Regardless of provocation, the first-class cabin had fallen silent as passengers observed the unprecedented breakdown in service professionalism. Thomas Wilson remained half-standing in row 2, ready to further intervene if necessary. The Whitmans watched with concerned expressions from row 3. Patricia Donovan maintained her executive composure while continuing to document the escalating situation on her tablet. Victoria finally broke the tense silence, addressing the triplets directly for the first time with barely controlled hostility. Are you satisfied now? You've disrupted the entire cabin with these ridiculous demands. This direct accusation, blaming the victims of her differential treatment for the consequences of her own behavior, represented complete abandonment of professional standards. More importantly, it revealed what many observers had begun to suspect. Victoria's actions stemmed from personal animus, rather than misunderstood policies or procedural confusion. Before anyone could respond to this inappropriate accusation, Jennifer returned from the cockpit with a serious expression. The captain has requested your presence in the galley. Victoria, we're in the middle of service. Victoria protested. Though her voice lacked its usual authority, this isn't a request. Jennifer clarified quietly. Captain Garcia has invoked Section 4 of the Cabin Leadership Protocol. I'm to assume first-class service responsibilities while you report to the galley immediately. Section 4 was unmistakable to any experienced flight attendant, the formal procedure for temporary removal of a crew member from passenger-facing duties during flight. This extraordinary measure confirmed the seriousness with which the captain viewed the situation following Jennifer's report. Victoria's expression reflected momentary shock before hardening into resentment. Without further protest, she turned sharply and moved toward the galley, leaving Jennifer to address the first-class cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for any disruption to your flight experience. Jennifer announced with professional composure that belied her junior status. I'll be overseeing first-class service for the remainder of our journey. Please let me know if there's anything I can do to make you more comfortable. As Jennifer began distributing properly heated towels to all passengers, including the triplets, Patricia Donovan approached the first row. I want to personally apologize for the service disparities you've experienced, she said quietly. Addressing the triplets directly, this isn't representative of Skyline's values or standards. We understand the distinction between individual behavior and institutional values, Zoe replied with remarkable maturity. Our documentation focuses on specific actions, rather than generalizing to the entire airline. Donovan appeared momentarily surprised by this sophisticated response from a 12-year-old. Your composure throughout this situation has been extraordinary. May I ask how you've maintained such professional documentation despite the evident provocation? Our grandmother taught us strategic composure during discriminatory encounters, Amada explained. She emphasized that dignity combined with documentation creates accountability more effectively than emotional reactions. She developed these protocols during the civil rights movement. Jade added precisely, the methodology remains statistically effective despite contextual evolution. Patricia Donovan's expression reflected genuine admiration. Your grandmother sounds like a remarkable woman. Her teachings have clearly created extraordinary granddaughters. As Donovan returned to her seat, the first-class cabin gradually settled into a new equilibrium. Jennifer provided consistent, professional service to all passengers, including the triplets. The obvious contrast with Victoria's differential treatment further confirmed the personal rather than procedural nature of the previous disparities. In the galley, Victoria Hayes faced Captain Robert Garcia's formal intervention, a career-defining moment that would have consequences extending far beyond this single flight. The specific nature of that conversation remained unknown to the cabin passengers, but its significance was evident in Victoria's continued absence from passenger service. Meanwhile, the Reynolds triplets maintained their strategic composure, neither celebrating the intervention nor reacting emotionally to the resolution. Their documentation continued uninterrupted, creating a comprehensive record of both the discriminatory treatment and the resulting accountability measures. What they couldn't know yet, what no one on the flight fully realized, was that this confrontation had transformed a routine discriminatory encounter into something with potential consequences extending throughout an entire airline and possibly an industry. The combination of their meticulous documentation, multiple witness interventions, board member oversight, and formal captain involvement had created accountability mechanisms that would ultimately lead to systemic changes affecting countless passengers beyond Flight SL-447. For now, though, the triplets simply continued their strategic composure methodology, maintaining dignity while documenting events with the methodical precision their grandmother had taught them, creating records that could not be dismissed as misunderstanding, miscommunication, or oversensitivity. As Flight SL-447 began its initial descent toward Los Angeles, the cabin atmosphere remained charged with the lingering tension of the confrontation. But within that tension lay the seeds of potential transformation, both individual and systemic, catalyzed by three 12-year-old girls who had been prepared by their grandmother to transform discriminatory encounters into accountability opportunities through strategic composure. The first intervention. Patricia Donovan closed her tablet after completing her 16th page of detailed documentation. As a Skyline board member and head of the Customer Experience Committee, she had witnessed something unprecedented in her decades of corporate oversight. Systematic discrimination against three young passengers, followed by complete breakdown of professional protocols when that discrimination was challenged. What made the situation even more extraordinary was the composed response of the targets themselves. The Reynolds triplets had neither reacted emotionally nor accepted the differential treatment without record. Instead, they had implemented a sophisticated documentation methodology that created comprehensive evidence of both individual behavior and systematic patterns. Donovan checked her watch, approximately 30 minutes until landing in Los Angeles. The confrontation had concluded with Victoria Hayes removed from passenger service under Section 4 of the Cabin Leadership Protocol, a rare and serious intervention that would have significant professional consequences regardless of any subsequent actions. Jennifer Lopez had assumed first-class service responsibilities with remarkable composure. Given the circumstances, her provision of consistent premium service to all passengers, including the triplets, further confirmed that Victoria's differential treatment had represented personal choice rather than airline policy or procedural misunderstanding. The first-class cabin had settled into uneasy calm. Following the confrontation, passengers exchanged occasional glances but maintained the polite fiction of privacy that typically characterized premium travel. Thomas Wilson had returned to his seat in 2 amperes after confirming that proper service was being provided to all passengers. The Whitmans discussed the situation in hushed tones, their expressions reflecting concerned disapproval. Throughout this aftermath, the Reynolds triplets continued their documentation without disruption to their composed exteriors. Their methodical recording represented not just evidence collection, but the practical application of their grandmother's strategic composure philosophy, maintaining dignity while creating accountability through comprehensive records. Donovan made a decision. As a board member with oversight responsibility, she had observed and documented the situation. Now intervention beyond Captain Garcia's operational response was required. She activated her secure Skyline communications channel and composed a message to Marcus Reynolds, copying the airline's chief operating officer and chief human resources officer. Significant service failure involving discriminatory treatment of 3 young passengers on SL-447. Captain has invoked Section 4 for Senior FA. Will provide comprehensive documentation upon landing. Situation contained but warrants immediate executive response. Passengers affected have maintained extraordinary composure and created detailed documentation of multiple service disparities. After sending this initial notification, Donovan approached the triplets row again. Their continued documentation and composed demeanor reflected remarkable maturity that contradicted every assumption Victoria Hayes had apparently made about younger travelers. "May I ask your names?" Donovan inquired, although she had already noted them from the passenger manifest. "Zoe Reynolds." The journal writer replied, "Amada Reynolds." The one with headphones added, "Yada Reynolds." The tablet user concluded, Donovan nodded, confirming her suspicion based on their surname and extraordinary composure. "You're Marcus Reynolds' daughters?" "Yes, ma'am," Zoe confirmed without elaboration. The simple acknowledgement carried significance beyond the obvious family connection. Marcus Reynolds wasn't just Skyline's founder and CEO. He was one of the most respected Black executives in the aviation industry. Having transformed a regional carrier into a global airline, through innovative service models and inclusive corporate culture. That his daughters had experienced systematic discrimination on his own airline represented irony bordering on Greek tragedy. That they had responded with such strategic effectiveness suggested both excellent preparation and exceptional character. Your father is meeting you in Los Angeles. Donovan confirmed. Yes, Amara replied. We're attending the Hudson Summer Institute for their engineering program, Donovan nodded. Making a decision about appropriate next steps. I've sent preliminary notification about what occurred today. Given the nature of the situation, more detailed follow-up will be required upon landing. We have comprehensive documentation, Jade offered, indicating her tablet. 17 distinct service disparities across 9 categories, each with precise timestamps and comparison metrics. I've documented the narrative elements, Zoe added, touching her journal, including direct quotations and contextual factors, and I've noted interpersonal dynamics and nonverbal indicators, Amara completed. Our records are complementary but independently verified. Donovan couldn't help but be impressed by this systematic approach. Many adults facing discrimination struggled to create coherent documentation under emotional stress. These 12-year-olds had implemented a methodology that would satisfy even the most stringent corporate investigation requirements. Your documentation will be extremely valuable, she acknowledged. Would you be willing to share it as part of the formal review process? That's why we created it. Zoe explained simply, documentation without accountability serves limited purpose. This sophisticated understanding of both documentation methodology and its strategic application further confirmed what Donovan had suspected throughout the flight. These weren't typical 12-year-olds, but extraordinarily well-prepared young women implementing principles they clearly understood at a fundamental level. Before Donovan could respond further, the captain's voice came over the intercom, steady and authoritative. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Garcia speaking. We've begun our initial descent toward Los Angeles International Airport. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for landing. Jennifer appeared immediately, moving through the first-class cabin with professional efficiency to ensure compliance with landing preparations. When she reached the triplets row, she spoke with genuine warmth. We'll be landing in approximately 20 minutes. Is there anything you need before we begin final descent? We're fine. Thank you. The triplets responded with synchronized politeness. Jennifer hesitated, then added quietly, I want to apologize again for what happened today. That's not who we are as an airline. We understand the distinction between individual behavior and institutional values, Amara assured her gently. Jennifer appeared genuinely relieved by this perspective. Thank you for that understanding. It means a lot. As Jennifer continued through the cabin, Patricia Donovan returned to her seat to prepare for landing. Her tablet had received a response to her earlier message, a brief acknowledgement from Marcus Reynolds, indicating he would meet the flight personally upon arrival. This unusual response, CEOs rarely met incoming flights regardless of service issues, suggested the personal dimension of the situation had significant implications beyond standard corporate protocols. Marcus Reynolds wasn't just responding as an airline executive to a service failure, he was responding as a father whose children had experienced discrimination on his own airline. Throughout the cabin, first-class passengers prepared for landing with the routine adjustments of frequent travelers, stowing electronic devices, returning seats to upright positions, securing personal items. The procedural normality contrasted with the extraordinary confrontation that had occurred just 30 minutes earlier. In the galley, Victoria Hayes remained isolated from passenger contact per Captain Garcia's Section 4 intervention. Her 18-year career hung in precarious balance, with potential consequences ranging from formal reprimand to termination depending on post-flight investigation findings. The Reynolds triplets continued their documentation until the final announcement requiring all electronic devices to be stowed. Jade saved her detailed log and powered down her tablet. Zoe completed her narrative record and closed her journal. Amara removed her headphones and stored them in their case. Their synchronized efficiency reflected both the practical harmony of identical triplets and the disciplined methodology their grandmother had taught them, completing documentation processes with the same careful attention they had maintained throughout the discriminatory encounter. As Flight SL 447 descended through the clouds toward Los Angeles International Airport, the first intervention had been completed. Captain Garcia had removed Victoria Hayes from passenger service under formal protocols. Patricia Donovan had initiated executive notification and preliminary investigation procedures. Jennifer Lopez had restored appropriate service standards for all first-class passengers. But the most significant intervention had been implemented before any official response, the strategic composure methodology executed by 3 12-year-old girls who had transformed what could have been merely unpleasant personal experience into comprehensive documentation that would ultimately ensure accountability. What no one yet fully realized, not even Patricia Donovan, with her executive oversight perspective, was how this incident would catalyze changes, extending far beyond one flight attendant's behavior or one corporate response. The combination of meticulous documentation, multiple witness interventions, board member oversight, and formal operational protocols had created the conditions for systematic transformation throughout an entire airline and potentially an industry. For now, though, Flight SL 447 continued its descent toward Los Angeles, where the next phase of intervention would begin, led by a CEO confronting discrimination against his own children on the airline he had built with a vision of inclusive excellence. The Reynolds triplets maintained their strategic composure as the aircraft touched down, neither celebrating the intervention nor reacting emotionally to the resolution. Their grandmother's methodology had worked exactly as designed, creating accountability through dignified documentation rather than emotional confrontation. As the landing gear deployed with a mechanical thunk and the Los Angeles skyline emerged through the windows, the first intervention concluded and the next phase prepared to begin. The first-class cabin of Skyline Flight SL 447 had transformed from a space of premium comfort to the stage for a rapidly unfolding drama. With Victoria banished to the galley, a strange vacuum of authority existed in the forward cabin. Jennifer Lopez quickly stepped in, her expression a mixture of professionalism and genuine concern. As she approached the Reynolds triplets, "I want to personally apologize for what just happened," she said quietly, kneeling beside their row to meet them at eye level. "This isn't representative of Skyline's values or service standards. We understand," Zoe replied, her composure intact despite the confrontation. "Individual actions don't necessarily reflect institutional values." Jennifer was momentarily taken aback by the mature response from a 12-year-old. "Is there anything I can get for you?" "Anything at all. We're fine for now. Thank you," Amara assured her with a small smile. As Jennifer moved to check on other first-class passengers, Thomas Wilson unfastened his seatbelt and approached the triplets' row again. His expression serious. "What just happened was completely unacceptable," he said, his voice carrying the authority of his executive position. "I've been flying Skyline first class for 15 years and have never witnessed such behavior from a crew member." "Thank you for speaking up earlier," Jade replied. "Many people observe discrimination but remain silent." Wilson nodded, acknowledging both the gratitude and the gentle rebuke implied in her words. "I've already sent emails to my contacts at Skyline Corporate. This incident shouldn't be buried in standard customer service channels. We'd be happy to provide statements as well," Eleanor Whitman said, leaning forward from across the aisle. "Richard and I saw everything from the beginning. The plastic cups, the economy blankets, all of it. I was a school teacher for 38 years, she continued, her voice carrying the practiced authority of someone who had managed classrooms for decades. "I've seen plenty of adults who should know better treating children unfairly. What happened here today wasn't about maintaining standards. It was about prejudice. Plain and simple." Richard Whitman nodded in agreement. "We fly first class 8 or 9 times a year. The only disruption to our experience today came from Ms. Hayes, not from you three." More passengers began to voice their support, creating an impromptu community of witnesses united in their disapproval of Victoria's behavior. "I've got the whole thing recorded." Michael Stewart offered from row 5, holding up his smartphone. "I'm a journalist with the Business Travel Quarterly. Would you like me to send you the footage?" Patricia Donovan addressed the cabin with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to managing corporate crises. "I appreciate everyone's concern and willingness to document what occurred. As a Skyline board member, I want to assure you that this incident will receive immediate attention at the highest levels of the company." She turned to the Reynolds triplets. "I didn't realize who you were when I boarded, though I should have connected the names. Your father has transformed this airline with his vision for inclusive excellence. What you experienced today represents everything he's worked to eliminate from our corporate culture. We're used to people not making the connection," Zoe replied with a small smile. "Dad always says it's sometimes advantageous to be underestimated." "Well, you certainly handled this situation with remarkable poise," Patricia acknowledged. "Many adults wouldn't have maintained such composure under similar circumstances." In the galley, Victoria sat on a jump seat, her face in her hands. Jennifer had delivered the captain's orders. She was to remain in the galley for the duration of the flight, maintaining minimum required crew presence, but avoiding any further contact with passengers. Back in the cabin, Thomas Wilson was still engaged with the triplets, his initial outrage now replaced with genuine curiosity. "If you don't mind my asking," he said, his voice lowered slightly, "has this happened to you before? You all seem so prepared for it." The triplets exchanged glances. their identical features revealing subtle differences in expression. Zoe thoughtful. Amara compassionate. Jade analytical. We've experienced various forms of this scenario, approximately 17 times in premium travel settings. Jade replied matter-of-factly, though this was among the more blatant examples. 17 times. Wilson repeated, genuinely shocked. But your children. Black children in predominantly white spaces. Amara clarified gently, our father has prepared us for these encounters since we were old enough to travel. It's why we document everything, Zoe added, tapping her journal. Grandma Josephine taught us that our experiences need to be recorded, not just for accountability, but for historical context. Wilson nodded slowly, absorbing the implications. As a wealthy white man, his presence in first class had never been questioned. His belonging never doubted. The idea that these children had developed protocols for handling discrimination as a routine travel preparation struck him as both impressive and profoundly sad. You mentioned your grandmother, he said. She sounds like a remarkable woman. She was. Amara confirmed, a flash of sadness crossing her face. She marched with Dr. King, integrated her university's chemistry department, and raised our father as a single mother. She taught us that dignity isn't what someone gives you. It's what you refuse to let them take away. The conversation was interrupted by the captain's voice over the intercom, steady and authoritative. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Garcia speaking. We're beginning our initial descent into Los Angeles. At this time, I'd like to request that all passengers return to their seats and fasten their seatbelts. A passenger complied. Jennifer supervised the cabin preparation for landing. The incident had transformed the usual first-class insularity into something unexpected. A community united by their witnessing of injustice and their desire to stand against it. Patricia Donovan returned to her seat in 3C, but not before stopping at the triplets row one more time. I've been texting with your father, she confided quietly. He's meeting the flight personally. The triplets nodded, unsurprised. They knew their father's response would be swift and decisive, not because of their status as his daughters, but because of his lifelong commitment to confronting discrimination in all its forms. As Flight SL-447 descended through the clouds toward Los Angeles International Airport, Victoria Hayes remained isolated in the galley, contemplating the ruins of her career. What had begun as an assertion of her authority had evolved into something that would likely end with her termination. The Reynolds triplets, meanwhile, continued their documentation with methodical precision, Zoe completing her journal entries, Jade finalizing her digital record, Amara composing a detailed narrative account on her tablet. Their father had taught them that justice required evidence, and they were ensuring that this incident, like the 17 before it, would be meticulously preserved. What they couldn't know was that this particular incident would have consequences far beyond their personal experience. Consequences that would transform not just one flight attendant's career, but an entire airline's approach to inclusive service. Captain Intervention. The Los Angeles skyline emerged through the aircraft's windows as Skyline Flight SL-447 descended through 10,000 feet. The characteristic Southern California haze softened the edges of the city's sprawl, while the Pacific Ocean shimmered to the west. Under normal circumstances, the view would have captivated the first-class passengers. Today, however, their attention remained fixed on the drama unfolding within the cabin. Captain Robert Garcia's voice came over the intercom again, his tone professionally measured, but with an undercurrent of unusual formality. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've been cleared for landing at Los Angeles International Airport. Our current weather is clear skies with a temperature of 75 degrees. Local time is 1:47 p.m. We anticipate touching down in approximately 15 minutes. He paused briefly before continuing. I would also like to inform you that I'll be visiting the first-class cabin briefly before landing to address a service matter. My first officer has full command of the aircraft during this time, so please remain in your seats with seatbelts fastened. The announcement created a ripple of surprise throughout the cabin. Captains rarely left the cockpit during the descent phase, except in cases of serious emergency. The fact that Captain Garcia was doing so now underscored the gravity of what had occurred. Jennifer Lopez approached the cockpit door, keying in the security code to admit the captain. Robert Garcia emerged, his uniform immaculate, his expression professionally neutral, though his eyes revealed concern. At 52, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a pilot who had logged over 22,000 flight hours, including 15 years with Skyline. His salt and pepper hair and trim mustache gave him an air of distinguished authority that commanded immediate respect. He surveyed the first-class cabin briefly, noting the expectant faces of the passengers before making his way directly to the first row. Stopping beside the triplets, he performed a small, formal bow, a gesture of respect rarely seen in modern aviation. Miss Reynolds, Miss Reynolds, and Miss Reynolds, he addressed each girl individually, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed cabin. I want to personally apologize for the service failures you've experienced on this flight. This is not representative of Skyline's values, and it is certainly not representative of the airline your father has built. Zoe, designated by unspoken agreement as the triplet spokesperson in this moment, responded with equal formality. Thank you, Captain Garcia. We appreciate your intervention. Garcia nodded, acknowledging her maturity while clearly distressed that it had been necessitated by the circumstances. Your father revolutionized this industry with his commitment to treating every passenger with dignity and respect. What happened today represents a failure that will be addressed at the highest levels. He turned to address the entire first-class cabin, his voice taking on the authoritative tone that had guided passengers through turbulence and challenging weather for decades. Ladies and gentlemen, as your captain, I take full responsibility for everything that occurs on this aircraft. The behavior you witnessed today from Senior Flight Attendant Hayes violated Skyline's core values, and my personal standards as captain of this flight, Victoria, still sequestered in the galley, could hear every word. Her face burned with humiliation as Garcia continued his public repudiation of her actions. I want to thank those of you who spoke up. The captain acknowledged, in particular, Mr. Wilson and the Whitmans, for advocating for our young passengers when they should never have needed advocacy in the first place. Thomas Wilson nodded in somber acknowledgement. While the Whitmans exchanged glances that mixed satisfaction with lingering outrage, I also want to recognize board member Donovan, Garcia continued, whose presence on this flight was fortuitous. Her immediate documentation and intervention reflect the rapid response we strive for when service failures occur. Patricia Donovan maintained her professional composure, though her tablet continued to document the captain's address, another piece of evidence in what had become a comprehensive record of the incident. Captain Garcia returned his attention to the Reynolds triplets. I've been in communication with your father. He will be meeting the aircraft personally upon our arrival. This news sent a visible reaction through Victoria, who had emerged just enough from the galley to hear the captain's words. Marcus Reynolds meeting the flight personally meant this wasn't just going to be a standard HR complaint. The CEO's direct involvement suggested consequences far beyond what she had imagined when this confrontation began. First Officer Ramirez has the aircraft well in hand, Garcia assured the passengers, but aviation protocol requires me to return to the cockpit for landing. Flight Attendant Lopez will continue to provide first-class service for the remainder of our journey. Thank you for your understanding during this unfortunate situation. As the captain turned to leave, Jade spoke up unexpectedly. Captain Garcia. He paused, turning back to her with raised eyebrows. Yes, Miss Reynolds. This isn't your fault, Jade said, her analytical mind focusing on his earlier claim of responsibility. Systemic issues require systemic solutions, but individual actions remain the responsibility of the individuals who commit them. Garcia's expression softened momentarily, revealing genuine appreciation for her insight. That's very gracious. Miss Reynolds, nevertheless, as captain, I set the tone for my crew. I'll be addressing our procedures to prevent similar incidents in the future. With a final nod to the cabin, he returned to the cockpit, leaving behind a first-class section now unified in their shared experience of having witnessed both discrimination and the beginning of accountability. Jennifer supervised final landing preparations, ensuring tray tables were stowed and seats were in their upright positions. As she passed row 3, Patricia Donovan gestured for her attention. You handled a difficult situation admirably. Patricia commended quietly. Your intervention will be noted in my official report. Thank you. Ms. Donovan, Jennifer replied, genuinely grateful for the recognition. I just did what any professional should have done. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. Patricia observed. Ethical courage can be rarer than we'd like to admit. In the first row, the triplets were preparing for landing with the practiced efficiency of experienced travelers. Zoe closed her journal, carefully securing it in her bag. Amara removed her headphones, stowing them in their designated case. Jade powered down her tablet. Having completed her documentation of the incident, Thomas Wilson leaned forward from his seat in 2 amperes. I meant what I said earlier, he told them quietly. I've already contacted several members of Skyline's executive team that I know personally. This won't be swept under the rug. Thank you, Mr. Wilson, Zoe replied with a small smile. But I don't think that will be necessary. Our father tends to be quite thorough when addressing discrimination. I imagine he does. Wilson acknowledged. Remembering Marcus Reynolds' reputation for principled leadership, I've followed his career since he started Skyline. The industry said a black-owned airline couldn't compete with the legacy carriers. Now Skyline is outperforming most of them. Dad says excellence is the most effective response to skepticism. Amara noted. The aircraft banked gently, beginning its final approach to LAX. Through the windows, the vast sprawl of Los Angeles stretched to the horizon, the midday sun reflecting off glass skyscrapers and the blue expanse of the Pacific Ocean. Victoria remained in the galley, strapped into the jump seat, her thoughts racing with the implications of what awaited her on the ground. 18 years of service, countless miles flown, thousands of passengers served, all potentially erased by one inexplicable vendetta against 3 children who had done nothing to deserve her hostility. The landing gear deployed with a mechanical thunk, and the aircraft's nose tilted downward for final approach. Jennifer made her way to her own jump seat, securing herself for landing while maintaining a professional distance from Victoria. In the first-class cabin, conversations had shifted to the practicalities of arrival, connecting flights to be caught, hotel reservations to be confirmed, ground transportation to be arranged. The incident with Victoria had created an unusual sense of community among these typically reserved premium passengers. Business cards were exchanged, contact information shared, all with the understanding that they might be called upon as witnesses to what they had observed. The wheels touched down with a slight chirp, and the engine's reverse thrust, slowing the massive aircraft as it raced down the runway. Captain Garcia's voice came over the intercom one final time. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Los Angeles. Local time is 2:04 p.m. On behalf of Skyline Airways, he paused meaningfully before continuing, those of us committed to our values of dignity, respect, and inclusive excellence. Thank you for choosing to fly with us today. The emphasis was subtle but unmistakable. As the aircraft taxied toward the gate, first-class passengers began gathering their belongings, the usual rush to deplane temporarily suspended by their curiosity about what would happen next. Victoria remained strapped in her jump seat, aware that her 18-year career was likely coming to an end. Not with the dignity of retirement, but with the humiliation of termination for cause. And as the aircraft's engine spooled down to silence, she prepared herself to face not just an HR representative or a station manager, but Marcus Reynolds himself, the CEO whose children she had targeted for reasons she could no longer clearly articulate even to herself. The aircraft door was about to open on a reckoning that would transform not just Victoria's future, but the culture of an entire airline. The revelation? The jet bridge connected to Skyline Flight SL 447 with a metallic thunk, sealing against the Airbus A350's fuselage. First Officer Ramirez's voice came over the intercom. Cabin crew. Doors to arrival and cross-check. Jennifer Lopez moved to the main cabin door. Her motions practiced and precise, despite the unusual tension pervading the aircraft. Before she could begin the standard disembarkation process, however, an unexpected figure appeared in the jet bridge entrance. Marcus Reynolds stood framed in the doorway, his 6'2" frame commanding immediate attention. At 45, he carried himself with the poised confidence of a man who had built a billion-dollar company from the ground up. His charcoal Tom Ford suit was impeccably tailored, the Skyline pin on his lapel catching the light as he stepped into the aircraft. His expression was controlled but intense, dark eyes scanning the cabin with laser focus. Jennifer froze momentarily, startled by the CEO's unannounced arrival. In her 11 months with Skyline, she had seen Marcus Reynolds only in company videos and the occasional photograph in the corporate newsletter. Mr. Reynolds, she managed, recovering her professional composure. We weren't expecting you aboard. Sire. Circumstances changed, he replied, his deep voice carrying the slight traces of a New Orleans upbringing, carefully modulated through years of corporate leadership. Thank you for protecting my daughters today. Ms. Lopez. The fact that he knew her name, that the CEO of a global airline with over 12,000 employees had identified a relatively new flight attendant, momentarily stunned Jennifer into silence. Marcus didn't wait for her response. His focus had already shifted to the first row, where the triplets were gathering their belongings. His expression softened visibly at the sight of his daughters, relief washing over his features before his professional mask returned. Dad. Amara was the first to spot him, her composed demeanor momentarily giving way to the natural reaction of a 12-year-old seeing her father. Marcus moved down the aisle with measured steps, nodding briefly to acknowledge Patricia Donovan and Thomas Wilson, but maintaining his course toward his daughters. When he reached the first row, he knelt beside them, bringing himself to their eye level, a habit formed when they were much younger, but maintained as a sign of respect. Are you all right? he asked, his voice low enough that only they could hear, his eyes scanning each identical face for signs of distress. We're fine, Dad, Zoe assured him, handing him her journal. Everything is documented. Sivente en pages. Jade added precisely, with timestamps and direct quotations. Marcus accepted the journal with a grim nod, his jaw tightening as he flipped through the detailed account of Victoria's behavior. After a moment, he closed it and returned his attention to his daughters. You handled this exactly as we've discussed, he said, pride evident in his tone, dignity maintained, evidence secured, no escalation. Grandmother would have approved, Amara noted with a small smile. She would have done more than approve. Marcus replied, a flash of emotion crossing his features. She would have been prouder than words could express. He stood, his full height imposing in the confines of the aircraft cabin. We'll discuss this further at home. For now, William is waiting with the car to take you to the house. The triplets nodded, understanding that their father needed to address the situation professionally. Now that he had assured himself of their well-being, they gathered their belongings with efficient movements, preparing to disembark. Marcus turned his attention to the first-class cabin at large, his expression shifting to one of professional leadership. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to personally thank each of you who spoke up today. Your willingness to intervene represents the community standard Skyline strives to foster on every flight. His gaze moved from Thomas Wilson to the Whitmans to Michael Stewart, acknowledging each witness with a respectful nod. Board member Donovan has shared preliminary details of what transpired. I assure you that this incident will be addressed comprehensively and transparently. Patricia approached, extending her hand. Marcus, I've compiled initial documentation. The situation is as serious as reported. I expected nothing less from your assessment. Patricia, Marcus replied, shaking her hand firmly. Your presence on this flight was fortunate timing, or unfortunate, depending on one's perspective, Patricia noted with a meaningful glance toward the galley where Victoria remained out of sight. Marcus's expression hardened momentarily before he controlled it. Where is Flight Attendant Hayes now? Captain Garcia restricted her to the galley for the remainder of the flight. Jennifer explained, having approached cautiously, she's been instructed to remain on board until all passengers have deplaned. Marcus nodded. That was appropriate. Please inform Miss Hayes that I'll be speaking with her personally before she leaves the aircraft. The statement, delivered in a measured tone, that nonetheless carried unmistakable authority, sent a ripple of reaction through the remaining passengers. The CEO himself would be addressing the flight attendant's behavior, a level of executive involvement almost unheard of in typical customer service disputes. Marcus turned back to his daughters, who had finished gathering their belongings and now stood ready to depart. William will meet you at the priority exit, he instructed, giving each a brief but warm embrace. I'll join you at the house as soon as this matter is resolved. Zoe handed him her journal again. You'll need this. Page 12 has the most comprehensive timeline. Marcus accepted it with a somber nod. Thank you. Zoe, your documentation will ensure accountability. As the triplets made their way toward the exit, they moved with the same composed dignity they had maintained throughout the flight, nodding respectfully to the passengers who had supported them and receiving words of encouragement in return. Remarkable young women, Thomas Wilson commented as they passed his seat. They take after their grandmother, Marcus replied, a flash of pride momentarily breaking through his professional demeanor. Once his daughters had safely exited the aircraft, Marcus's attention shifted fully to the matter at hand. Ms. Lopez, please begin passenger deplaning. I'd like to speak with Captain Garcia before addressing Mrs. Hayes. Jennifer nodded and returned to the main door, beginning the standard announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Los Angeles International Airport. We'll begin deplaning with our first-class passengers, followed by business class and economy. As passengers began to gather their belongings and move toward the exit, Marcus made his way to the cockpit, where Captain Garcia was completing his post-landing checklist. Captain, Marcus greeted, extending his hand. Mr. Reynolds, Garcia replied, standing to shake his CEO's hand firmly. I apologize for the situation with your daughters. From what I understand, you intervened appropriately once you became aware of the issue, Marcus acknowledged. My concern is how it was allowed to escalate to that point. Garcia nodded grimly. I've been asking myself the same question. Hayes has been with Skyline since the beginning. One of the original flight attendants from Reynolds regional days, never had a serious complaint in 18 years, until she encountered 3 young black girls in first class. Marcus noted, his tone neutral, but his implication clear. Yes, sire, Garcia acknowledged. I've already initiated the formal incident documentation. Flight Attendant Lopez has provided preliminary statements, and board member Donovan has submitted her observations. Good. Marcus replied. I'll need to speak with Hayes personally before this goes further. I owe it to the company and to my daughters to understand exactly what happened here. Meanwhile, in the first-class cabin, passengers were deplaning slowly. Many lingering to observe the unfolding corporate drama. Patricia Donovan had taken charge of collecting contact information from those willing to provide statements, her board authority streamlining what would typically have been a cumbersome process. Mr. Wilson, the company will be in touch regarding your observations, she assured the investment banker as he prepared to leave. Your intervention on behalf of the Reynolds triplets was noted and appreciated. I only wish I'd spoken up sooner, Wilson admitted. It was clear from the beginning that something wasn't right about her service approach. In the galley, Victoria sat frozen in her jump seat, having overheard enough of the conversations to understand that Marcus Reynolds himself was on board and planned to address her personally. The reality of her situation was finally setting in with crushing clarity. She had discriminated against the CEO's children on his own airline. The magnitude of her miscalculation was staggering. Not just any CEO, Marcus Reynolds, whose rags to riches story had become legend in business circles. The son of a widowed schoolteacher who had leveraged his MIT engineering degree and a small inheritance into an aviation empire, a man who had overcome systemic barriers through sheer brilliance and determination, who had transformed industry standards while building one of the most diverse executive teams in corporate America. And she had targeted his children because they didn't fit her image of who belonged in first class. As the last passengers deplaned, Jennifer approached the galley cautiously. Victoria, Mr. Reynolds wants to speak with you before you leave the aircraft. Victoria nodded numbly, unable to formulate a verbal response. The career she had built over 18 years was about to end in a personal termination from the CEO himself, a catastrophic and very public conclusion to what had once been a source of pride and identity. Jennifer hesitated, then added, for what it's worth, I think you should just be honest about what happened. Whatever was going through your mind, whatever led to this, just tell the truth. Victoria looked up, her expression hollow. The truth is I don't even understand it myself. They didn't fit my image of first class. They were too young, too confident, she trailed off, unable or unwilling to complete the thought, too black. Jennifer suggested quietly, naming what Victoria wouldn't. Victoria flinched but didn't deny it. The main cabin had emptied now. Captain Garcia and First Officer Ramirez had completed their post-flight checks and exited through the jet bridge, leaving only Marcus Reynolds, Patricia Donovan, Jennifer Lopez, and Victoria Hayes on the aircraft. Marcus stood at the entrance to the galley, his imposing frame filling the narrow space. His expression was not angry but evaluative, studying Victoria with the careful assessment of someone measuring not just actions but intentions. Ms. Hayes, he said simply, his voice controlled and professional. Victoria stood automatically, the years of corporate hierarchy asserting itself, despite her inner turmoil. Mr. Reynolds, I won. He held up a hand, silencing her attempted explanation. Before you speak, I want you to understand exactly what happened on this flight. Not your perception of events, but the documented reality. Marcus opened Zoe's journal, finding a specific page marked with a post-it note. My daughter writes, at 10:47 Eastern Time, Flight Attendant Hayes provided first-class passengers in rows 2 through 5 with crystal glassware for beverage service. At 10, Ushar, she served identical beverages to us in plastic cups, typically reserved for economy service or turbulence conditions. When questioned about the discrepancy, she claimed it was standard procedure for younger travelers. Though no such policy exists in Skyline's service manual,